Hello, my name is Josh Bennett. This is my research proposal presentation for Info 285. Local tribal members, colonial marginalization, and digital archives, a research proposal. Let's start with the definition of traditional knowledge, the primary subject matter of my research. Traditional knowledge is knowledge, know-how, skills, and practices that are developed, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within a community, often forming part of its cultural or spiritual identity. That's from the World Intellectual Property Organization. What's at stake and what forms, I guess, the problem of my research is that traditional knowledge is not protected by conventional intellectual property systems. Research questions. I think I have them where I want them, but I'd like to summarize. I want to know, does the history of Native peoples in Northern California affect how they use public libraries? And I want to know specifically about archives, and I'd like to know locally whether folks think that traditional knowledge labels and traditional knowledge licensing is a good approach. A quick review of the literature in 3 parts. The first part, general research on Native Americans and libraries. This paper by Duarte, Imagining Creating Spaces for Indigenous Ontologies, introduced me to a common theme in the literature on this subject, colonial marginalization, which is has informed this researcher's treatment of the problem in one of the problems in the topic of Native Americans and archives. This next paper, Exploring the World of American Indian Libraries, takes a broad look at Native American tribal libraries and tribal colleges. Latsi Patterson is a longtime LIS professional from the University of Oklahoma. She's Comanche and an important voice on this topic. And the third general work is a paper, The Use of Public Libraries by Native Americans. It's a quantitative study, one of the few that have informed my research so far, and it provides some data that, that is important for my research. Next, let's look at 3 case studies that have informed my research, Native Americans and archives. First one's tribal archives, traditional knowledge, and local context, why the S matters. This is everything you need to know about the TK labels, traditional knowledge labels, and licenses. Kimberly Kristen's from University of Washington, and she's a big part of the local context project, but also the Mukutu content management system that we'll be looking at. Another one's The Right to Know, Decolonizing Native American Archives, a great piece looking at the work of Vine Deloria and his opinions and advocacies about advocacy for tribal libraries and libraries in general. Perhaps the most important case study and the one that is pretty central to my research proposal is Building SIPNUC, Digital Library, Archives, and Museum for Indigenous People. This paper has in it many of the themes that run through the literature on traditional knowledge, and including some of the problems with colonial marginalization and the lack of control that Native people have when it comes to their cultural items and their traditional knowledge. This paper tells a great story, and it's particularly significant to me. It's in Northern California, not too far from where I live and work. And finally, reports. There's two reports we have here. I'll show you. The first one's a big one, Protocols for Native American Archival Materials. This is folks that convened in Flagstaff, Arizona in 2005, I believe, to come up with best practices for handling traditional knowledge and traditional cultural items, physical items, for Native and non-Native institutions. And finally, collaborations between tribal and non-tribal organizations, suggested best practices for sharing expertise, cultural resources, and knowledge. This is a great one. Looks at different a collection of case studies, looking specifically at how institutions have come together, Native, non-Native, have come together to work through some of the problems of settler colonialism and archives, public libraries, and traditional knowledge and cultural items. Methodology, population and sampling design. For this research proposal, researchers will look for participants with the following characteristics: adult tribal members who have both a basic understanding of libraries and digital archives, as well as some understanding of local cultural issues and traditional knowledge. Sampling design will be purposive, not convenience sampling. Recruitment will target local schools, tribal agencies and programs, as well as clubs and cultural groups. Users of the local non-tribal library will also be recruited. Data collection instrument, focus groups. Because focus groups rely on participants speaking freely, efforts will be made to limit power differential in the groups. There will be 4 groups, and groups will be comprised of participants of roughly the same age. Group size. In addition, group size will be between 6 and 10 people, again, in order to create, as best we can, an environment that is conducive to intimate, open, free dialogue amongst participants. Focus groups are a great fit for the proposed research. Quote, focus groups allow participants to express themselves in their own words in describing their behaviors, beliefs, viewpoints, and preferences. This is very important for the work, the research that's proposed. Above almost anything else, it's important that this process is focused on Native voices. Quote, the goal of a focus group session is to discover both what people feel and why they feel that way. And finally, quote, focus groups seek to examine in detail participants' perceptions of services, situations, people, or products, which is a particular good fit for the proposed research. One thing that we'd like to do, in addition to getting Native voices reflecting on archives and libraries in a local context, we want to provide an example of how some of these issues are dealt with in other communities. And one example of that is Makurtu CMS. We understand that focus groups are an appropriate data gathering method for product development studies. Central to this proposed research is the question of the desirability and utility of an approach to archives that utilizes TK licenses and labels. Specifically, 10 minutes will be devoted to a presentation featuring the SIPMA Digital Library, Archives, and Museum, a project of the Karuk tribe of Northern California. Focus group discussion prompts will then elicit comments from participants on this topic. The platform that holds the SIPMA Digital Library, Archives, and Museum is Mukurtu, and that's this research methodology, a data gathering instrument, allows us to feature what is essentially a product, and test it out and get people's impressions of it. Back to our original research question, a big part of this proposed study is whether Native folks think that these mechanisms, these approaches to archives, are a good idea. Data analysis. Using the grounded theory approach, researcher will use open coding, which is a dividing of the data pulled out of a transcribed record of the focus group conversation, taking that data and dividing it into categories multiple times as you go, creating more categories as necessary.